So it's time for a what am I sowing and growing video for January, and I'll do a separate video for February because I know people like to plan ahead. So I'll just record the screen on my iPad and I'll put what I'm looking at up at the side of the screen so that you can follow along. So I'm starting off with red cabbages. I like to do red fugo for the first batch because I find it does a little bit better when it's sowed really early, and then for later batches I'll just use red drumhead. I also like to do 3 different varieties of kale, 2 greens and a red, and I like to do them nice and early now under grow lights for the first month because I find that all my kale start to go to seed in sort of April and May, so I like a replacement crop ready by the end of April, and that will then be eaten May, June and into early July, and then it'll be taken out and replaced with purple sprouting broccoli. The green varieties, the curly green varieties, do much better than the red varieties. So the red variety is scarlet and the greens are dwarf green and reflex. I just do scarlet because it looks so beautiful, but I don't do as much of it, nowhere near as much of it as the greens, because the greens don't go to seed as quickly as the reds. And even when they do start to grow to seed, they seem to be a little bit more prolific than the reds. So that's my recommendation. I don't do the Tuscan kales anymore because they just go to seed really quickly when they're sown so early. I will do, of course, a main crop of kales, which I will start in March, and they will come ready just as these early ones are finishing. So I'll always also do an early batch of peas. I start to try and get my peas as early as possible, but I don't find much benefit in overwintering them. I will start my peas right beginning of January, and I just do 3 peas in each module, and I don't need very many. I know some people do loads and loads of peas and grow them really high density. What I find is that peas respond to density in that if you only do quite a modest amount, so I do about 3 seeds every 8 inches, they just grow lusher and you just get more peas per vine, and you end up probably with pretty much the same sort of harvest as if you did 2 or 3 times that density. Anyway, I'm doing Oregon sugar pod, as I said. I'm only doing an 8-foot length of them, and I do them at the back of spinach or lettuce beds in a low tunnel on the allotment. They really do need that little bit of protection from a low tunnel. Tend to take that low tunnel off about April time, when the spinach doesn't need any protection, the lettuce doesn't need any protection, and the peas are at the top of the low tunnel, so they need the permanent supports putting in. But for that period of time, it really gives them a bit of a boost to have that little bit of protection. So I'm also doing my early carrots, and I do almost all of my carrots in the ground, but I don't start carrots in the ground until March. And even then, they're under cover, so they're under fleece or plastic or something like that. But what I do like to do is I like to get some carrots started. I've got quite a few tubs that I started back in late October, early November. They're doing pretty well now, this sort of size. But I like to get a few more started. And so I'm going to start some in January and some in February, and say some in the ground in March. The ones in January and February I will start in containers, and I'll germinate those containers in here in this conservatory. I just pop them in here for 10 days. That's pretty much, at that point they'll all have germinated. Germination will be really reliable because it's nice and warm in here. Well, not that warm, you can see how we're wrapped up here, but warm enough anyway for carrots to germinate in about 10 days. And then I'll take them straight to the allotment. I'll keep them in the polytunnel until the beginning of April, and then I'll put them outside. I put them high up so they're away from carrot fly. So you could try and germinate in February outside under fleece, but I just find germination is not very reliable when it's that cold outside. And so just that little bit of heat that you get inside makes all the difference. So we have had a bit of a disaster with our broad beans because of that -10 temperature that we had in the polytunnel and outside. And as a result, my broad beans, both inside and outside, are not looking good. So I am starting a new batch for the polytunnel at the beginning of January. I'll plant those out, sort of late January in the polytunnel, and I'll do another batch in February, which will go outside on the allotment if the ones that we sowed back in, I don't know, I can't remember now, October time, haven't recovered, which is not that unlikely because they might throw new shoots up from the base. So I'm also going to start some salad onions. I'm always starting salad onions basically every month, so there's nothing really new there. I like to do the purple varieties early in the year, so in January and February, and then I find it's better to just switch over to true salad onions in March and February and on there, March and April, because the red ones that I grow, Leela and North Holland Blood Red, they are a bulbing onion. So if you like your salad onions, with a big bulb, then you can obviously grow these bulbing varieties, Leela and North Holland Blood Red. But if you like them nice and slim, like I do, then best only grow them nice and early. Also going to do 3 different types of Asian greens. And the reason I'm doing them in January, because I did them in February last year, is that I found I didn't quite have continuity. So the Asian greens that we started sort of back in September time, they tend to go to seed in sort of January, February time for me. And so there's not quite enough time for a February sown batch to catch up and give us continuity. So I'm starting them in January, only going to go in the polytunnel for this first batch, and I'll start another batch in February. I am doing red pak choi, joy choi and tatsoi. We mainly do the tatsoi for salads ingredients, and the joy choi and the red pak choi. They tend to go into like soups and stir fries and things like that. And I'll start my first early cauliflowers. So I have got overwintered cauliflowers, they're looking quite nice, but for the ones I start this year, I like to start with the graffiti, which is this beautiful purple cauliflower. It's my absolute favourite cauliflower to grow. We have other cauliflowers for the late season that are also purple, but for now, early season's graffiti is quite expensive, so I don't do a lot of them. I'm only going to sow 5 in the hope that I get 4 plants. And I don't want to do more than 4 because it's an F1 variety, they all come at the same time. I do pot these on, so normally I never pot anything on. So normally I just prick out into the module, and then after about 4 to 6 weeks I plant that out, and it's quite a small plant. But for these cauliflowers, I found that it's better to pot them on once into a bigger pot, maybe a 6-inch pot, something like that, and then plant them out in April rather than March, which is what I would do for my other early brassicas. It just seemed to do a little bit better with that little bit more protection in the polytunnel for a little bit longer. So my peppers from December, they're all looking really nice now. Got great germination from those. And they're the ones that are going to go into the polytunnel in sort of mid-May kind of time. And then I've got 3 more low tunnels of peppers, and so that's 36 plants, and I'm going to sow those in 2 batches. The first batch, middle of January, the second batch, sometime in February, I can't remember. And the ones I'm doing in January are the ones that need the longest amount of time to mature, or will give us a bit of an early crop. So the early crop ones are the long yellow Ringo, and the later cropping ones are the long red Marconi, and especially the Red King. The Red King is such a lovely, really big stuffing pepper, but it does take a long time to mature. Ideally, I would have started it back in December, but I couldn't get hold of the seeds, so I've got seeds now, so that should be okay for the middle of January. And yeah, so my first batch January, second batch February. And I'm also doing Californian Wonder, because it's just the seeds are so cheap and it's fairly reliable, and it's a little bit quicker than the Red King, but it's not quite as big. So next up are the Pablo beetroot. So we did this last year as well, and we compared Pablo and Bolt Hardy, and Pablo did so much better than the Bolt Hardy. And the other thing I really liked about it is they grew really big, you know, this sort of size, and they were still really, really tender and sweet. So it meant that I could do this one sowing in January, and it just lasted for ages. You know, we started harvesting them sort of this sort of size, and then we finished harvesting them that sort of size in sort of July time. And I've got a lot of space for beetroot, so what I found is that it works really well at the edges. So I just did it at the edges of all the beds in the polytunnel and at the back of all of the pepper beds, and you know, it has plenty of time to grow before the peppers sort of shade it out. And yeah, it's just a great technique to sort of use it at the backs of things where it's not going to get in the way of anything. And I say especially at the back of things that are heat loving, that are going to have covers over for the life of the beetroot. Because although people say beetroot is a cool weather crop, it really loves the heat. I find, I don't know why people say it's a cool weather crop other than it can withstand a frost. It is definitely a heat loving crop if you can keep it well watered. I mean, obviously if it's outside you probably don't need to keep it that well watered, but if you're growing it in a polytunnel or you're growing it at the back of a low tunnel, then watering is pretty essential. Another batch of carrots then in the middle, and basically with carrots, as I say, I'm just timing them so they are about 10 days or more apart, because it takes about 10 days for them to germinate. And I've only got 2 little locations at the back of me here where I can pop 2 containers for germinating. I'm not actually this year going to grow as much in the conservatory as I grew last year, because we're away on holiday a lot more, and just watering in this conservatory when we're away on holiday is really difficult. So I'm using it primarily for germinating things quickly and then shifting them down to the allotment where it's easier to get them watered. Starting off with some radish, I'll do 2 batches. I'll do 1 batch in the polytunnel. They tend to come about 2 weeks earlier than batches that I do interplanted in low tunnels and coal frames. And I'll start the leeks that I interplant into the beds in the allotment, in the polytunnel, in between peppers and tomatoes and things like that. I just find I get a really nice early leek crop, and because leeks are so deep rooted, they do really well, surprisingly, in the polytunnel. Whereas for a lot of things, it's hard to keep them thriving really, because you know the watering demand in a polytunnel is just so high. So I don't need very many. I'll do about 24 modules of 4 each, and that kind of just fills up all the little gaps in the polytunnel basically. And we love leeks, and so it's nice to get a nice crop in sort of July and August time, actually through September as well. And then by then all of the leeks obviously out on the allotment are ready. So I don't normally start my onions early. I tend to start them about the middle of February. I've tried them in the past in January. I just find I grow less healthy plants, and also I tend to be under more pressure to get them planted out. And the challenge I've got is I've got nowhere really to plant them out until early to mid-April. So I want them started a little bit later, just so I've got that ability to get my early crops out before I put my onions in. But I do like to do my Zebrun onions a little bit earlier, just because they're a little bit slower, I find, than traditional onions. You know, Zebrun are kind of like a bit like a shallot, but more like an onion really in the way that they grow. Anyway, these Zebrun will be interplanted into my early parsnip beds, and I find that onions and parsnips, they grow really well together, and you get, there's no compromise basically. You get just as many parsnips as you would planting them without the onions, and the onions then are just a bonus. And because the Zebrun, they're so small, and I tend to do I'm doing 3 per module, so they only take up sort of this amount of space, and so there's loads of opportunity to kind of interplant them into beds. And I'm also going to do some North Holland blood red, which is another one of these. It's a bulbing onion, but it works really well as a spring onion when you sow it nice and early. And then the next batch of cauliflowers. And as I say, because these are an F1 variety, they all come at the same time. So don't do loads and loads of cauliflowers unless you like frozen cauliflower, which we don't. So then I'll do another batch of spinach. I've got loads of spinach in the ground at the moment, but what I like to do is kind of have loads of spinach over winter and then really rapidly clear it as I go into spring. And that means I need later batches of spinach to kind of, fill the gap as we go into late spring. So red kitten is one of our favourites. It does tend to go to seed. Well, all spinach tends to go to seed when the weather warms up, but yeah, it's just really lovely. So you'll see me sowing a few batches of that. And I'm starting my first early potatoes. I like to do Swift. Again, I'll just germinate them in this conservatory. So 10 days after I've done the carrots, I'll use the same 2 spots in the conservatory where I can put a pot to germinate 2 batches of Swift, 2 pots of Swift, and then I'll put them straight on the allotment in the mini greenhouse under fleece. And I'll do 2 pots every few weeks. We're not doing anywhere near as many potatoes this year as we have in the past because we're just not eating very many potatoes. We're not, for example, doing the super early baking potatoes this year that we did in the conservatory, even though it was an amazing crop. It was really nice to have baking potatoes in sort of May time. We're just not eating as many, so it's just not worth it. So then I'm doing my lettuces again. We've got loads of lettuce in the polytunnel. I've got loads of little lettuces interplanted into my carrot beds. Yeah, I've got lots of lettuce basically, but you can never have enough lettuce, and it's really nice to have a nice successional sowing of lettuce going on. So I do my first batch end of January, so I'll be harvesting those sort of mid-April, which means I can harvest them in the polytunnel all the way through April and to the middle of May, and then I'll take them out so I can get the tomatoes and the peppers in. But it's nice to have, just to use that kind of window of opportunity in the polytunnel to get a nice little lettuce crop. And it does mean that if we have some bad weather or frosts or whatever that sort of knock back the progress of the later batches of lettuce, we've kind of got this contingency in the polytunnel, and the ones in the polytunnel almost always do really well, no matter what the weather throws at them. So I'm doing Canasta, Riccia, Navarra and Grenoble Red, and most of the ones I'm going to do are Grenoble Red because if it just hearts up so nicely. So if we've got a little bit of a glut of lettuce, I just leave some of these Grenoble Reds to heart up, and then we harvest the whole plant. So that is it. That is January, and I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, I like sowing. I sow all the time. I like growing seedlings. I don't actually like the process of sowing, but I do like the process of growing seedlings and seeing that rapid sort of vibrant growth going on. And especially nice to do it in this conservatory. I do a lot of it on this rack here behind me, just because I sit in here a lot, I chill out in here. I just like to see all that growth going on. Right now all this rack is full of lettuce, which is what I just harvested today. So check out in a couple of days time, look out for my sneak peek of what I'm going to do in February video, and in the meantime just have a look at this database here that I've got on the iPad. You can find a link to it in the description below. My name's Steve, this is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.